I agree. I think we beaten that to death. There's one more thing that we kind of skipped over from earlier that I think is worthwhile spending a couple of minutes on before we wrap up, which is the game length issue, which was one of the things that I highlighted that I think was very controversial in most people's eyes. I think more than anything.
Do you think this is contributing to the viewership dip as well? That people are basically bored of the game, or how long the matches are, and the fact they never end quickly, etc.
So I would say it a little bit differently. So I think there's one issue, which is that given that you just don't know how long the games might take, and it's not like is it 2 maps or 3 maps, like is it 2 hours or 3 hours? Is it 1.5 hours or 4.5 hours? In the case of like some of the games, like almost 5 hours. And I think even Cologne final is a best of 5. Am I correct? So that could be even longer if so. So like I think, and this is something that impacts me specifically, so like take that with a grain of salt, but I do think it impacts other people, and based on the response that I've seen, and based on like what my friends have told me, it's the case too. I think if you don't know how long a game is going to take, it's less likely that you're going to plan your day around it. So for example, once people have families, once they're in their 30s and 40s, which the whole half the premise for growth in Counter-Strike is that every day somebody new is born, and once they're old enough, they might be a Counter-Strike fan, Counter-Strike player. And ideally, you don't lose everybody once they turn 30. You stay a fan even when you're 40 or you're 50 because you just like the game. You don't have to play it. You can still be a fan of the game. I don't play Counter-Strike. I haven't played it in a long time. Played like a couple games here and there, but I haven't played consistently in 9 years. And I still watch it like almost every single day. So, what you want is the new followers to come up, but you also want to retain the old people, if you will. And those old people over time, they have kids, they have families, they have other responsibilities, and it becomes harder for them. And the way you watch games is you literally carve yourself out a couple of hours. So, you might have other things, but you might say that, okay, this is the 2-hour slot that I'm just doing this thing. And, the rest of the day, whatever. But if you don't know if it's 2 hours, if it might be 4 hours, like at some point people around you will be upset, and like you're not going to be able to plan around it, and like that's going to force you to not tune in. Now, my premise is if I don't know if I can watch a game, I'm not watching the first half of it. Like if I know that I have a dinner at 8 p.m. on the day of an NBA Finals game, I'm not watching from 6 to 8. Because I know I'm missing the second half of the fourth quarter. I'm not watching with the first pieces of it. And I suspect if people think that it's unlikely that they're going to get to the end of the match, that I suspect that they're much less likely to even start watching in the first place. And then there's the secondary effect, which is the way schedules work. Because remember, let's say in the NBA, these are different arenas, different broadcasts many times. Like you might change channels when you go from game to game. So therefore, if one game is delayed, that doesn't have an impact on the other game. Sometimes like you lose like a couple of minutes of broadcast unless you go to the local channel, but the game still starts at that time. And generally you have a path to watching it. But here, if the first game is 4.5 hours, you know what that means? It means the second game that you just saved your 3 hours, even 4 hours for, might start 2 hours into when you thought it was going to start. So once again, like you just can't plan around it. Like it's not a product that functions for anybody with like other plans or responsibilities. Like it's like a commit your full day or watch like occasionally type thing. And one more thing that I would just say is I think that does have an impact on engagement. So put another way, the more engaged I am with the content, the more focused I am when I am watching, the more I'm going to get out of it and more interested I'm going to be in it, and the more likely it is that I'm going to watch the next time. So for example, I assume that you can relate to this. When you were watching HLTV, so not the website, when you used to go inside of the game to watch the games and you could control everything, you would see who you're watching, you'd click around, you'd see the map, watch whatever. You were like 100% focused. It's essentially the same as playing. There is like no passive experience. Therefore, you're fully engaged when you're doing that. So if you watch, you're 100% committed to that. Has, pros and cons, but the upside of that is that you're actually fully engaged when you're watching. Now, the more passive it gets as it goes to streaming first, where you have no control, to everybody watching on TVs and becomes a thing like, like I'll put the game on the background and, do some other stuff. I think it's less likely that you feel like a connection to the game and the results, and less likely that you go out of your way the next time to watch it. Now, like some of that, like it's just the nature of the product. Like, we can't expect everybody to watch inside of the game with like interactive controls forever. That would never happen. You would never get to the kind of scale that you would need. But on the other hand, like, if I'm only watching like these half games that I'm missing games, and I'm scheduling around it, but I still can't watch because the first game went to double OT on 2 maps, am I going to watch the next time when I got burned? I don't even know if I can watch. So I think there's a lot of viewers for whom over time, given the scheduling issues and the unpredictability of the game and the impact of that on the scheduling, what's happened is they basically just made it like a secondary thing where they actually are doing something else, whether it's like, doing work, talking to somebody else, watching something else. And then like if the game happens to be on, they might turn it on. And like in my case, in many days of IEM Cologne, I might sometimes forget the TV in the living room on the stream because that's where I'm in the morning. And for example, today I noticed when I went to get coffee before we started recording this that I forgot it on. So that's been a viewer the whole day. And for the days where there were 2 games on, I would have one of the games on my screen here, one of the games on the TV there, and I'd be working here. So theoretically, I'm 3 viewers. So, that's what I am to ESL. Sure. On the other hand, nowhere am I actually engaged. Yes. With the content. So like, I have a long enough history with it that I don't expect that I will churn out in the, in the coming years, but I could see how somebody might stop watching over time as you pay less and less attention. And at some point you might just realize like, hey, I actually didn't really feel like I missed out on anything. So that's a long-winded kind of, I think, some of my issues with game length. We can talk about solutions later, but curious to first kind of get your thoughts on that piece.
I mean, one of the problems I have with this whole thing is, let me think how to say it. Basically, this is something else we actually briefly touched on By the Numbers. And the whole point you're making about scheduling is something that actually me and Richard have been very cognizant of, just because when we worked with E-League, because obviously on E-League, they had like a set exact time slot for the live show on the Friday night. And they used to literally tell you, dude, like, and they would say it in like fucking like harsh tone where you knew they were serious. They were like, listen, if we run over literally 1 minute over time, it costs like, I can't even remember the number, but it was something retarded, like, $50,000 a second, that 1 minute or whatever, like some outrageous. Because the idea was you can play less ads, which means you lose all the money from the ad deliverable, and you potentially cut into another show, which means you probably don't show that show, and you probably have to show like, fucking something that's 20 minutes that's in your catalogue instead of a 30-minute show. So the actual like impact for being slightly over schedule was enormous, and yet you're in fucking Counter-Strike, where as you say, a game that's in the 30th round and one team's about to win 16-14, suddenly it goes 15-15 overtime. Well, let's just keep going, guys. Let's not end like that. You can't really run a sport like that, because if you notice, most sports are set up so that actually either there is like, it's so popular as a sport that it can run over whatever's next, like football's an obvious example. Like, they're going to show you the penalties no matter what was scheduled afterwards, because it's just going to get more views. Or you've got to be in a world where it always ends at an exact time. Like, you don't have overtime. It will literally only be a 90-minute game in the league, and if it's a draw, it's a draw. It's the end of the fucking game. Go home. Now, the problem we have in Counter-Strike is every single format we currently use has this variability. It's just that before the economy got out of control, it wasn't as extreme. Like, the difference is before it was more like a game could have lasted an hour and a half, or maybe it lasts 2 hours. As you say, the mixture of the economy, I'd even say online elements as well, evened up some of the like sort of skill elements. Like, it just meant like, yeah, as you say, the margin can't be 1.5 to 4.5. It can't be a 3-hour time difference. Like, I can't possibly schedule anything. I can't even schedule my business match. By the way, spoiler, you can't schedule a fucking tournament around that. How can I have 2 best of 3s in a day, but then it might be like an 11-hour day or a fucking 5-hour day? That doesn't even make sense for me. Like, as I noticed a point you made, which maybe we'll make the last point actually, about like who you show the games of. They don't even take that into account, dude. Like, if my first series ends really early, I just start some of them with accelerated schedule start showing me a game that all the fucking viewers from Brazil or Russia, they've either gone to bed or they haven't got up yet. So like, why am I showing the game now? But that's what we're already doing. We're treating every team as though they're all like identical, replaceable units, whereas they very much aren't. And in an entertainment industry, you have to be really cynical at the moment, in my opinion. You have to be like WWE style and make the matches the fans want in a way, That's the key, that it's the entertainment industry, which means like you should provide people with entertainment. Like is the competitive integrity better if every team has exactly to the minute the same break? Yeah, I would say so. On the other hand, if having that
instead of having those teams, with like 3 to 4 hour scheduling difference between their breaks.
Yep.
If the benefit of that is that Navi plays earlier in the morning when all their fans are awake, and Liquid plays later in the day when their fans are finally awake, my guess is you should probably do that.
Yes.
And obviously this is again one of these things where, like as you said, there's a very, very, very vocal minority that comments on these things and would say, like, I would never watch, I would never put up with this, etc. And I don't know that that's true in many of those cases, but I can understand why many of the people who are, presiding over these things have reluctance to decide against like very vocal commentary from, in some cases, like tens or hundreds of fans over something. But like that's the industry, and that's why, like, sometimes I think to get changes through, you unfortunately kind of just have to make unpopular decisions and then find out whether they work or not, because otherwise I think you just end up kind of running in the same place and probably not changing anything at all.
Because for me, that is a major issue. I know in your thread, people might have thought it was like a minor side issue. And in fact, I'm sure many of them think, you're just saying that because you're from MIVR and you just want Brazilian fans. Like, no, what they're missing there is that, like, think of how the discussion started. We made the point that you either need to literally increase the number of people watching. Well, good luck if you can fucking figure that out. Or you need to get more money in the space. I mean, that's like that joke before. What colour unicorn you want? Like, fucking hell, it's harder to get money in the space. So, like, but both at the moment, they're not impossible, but they're pretty hard, right? There's a reason why everyone's scratching their head. Well, the problem in this scenario is, let's at least maximize what we've got right now before we start trying to, like, fucking, turn on another tap or plug another hole. Let's maximize what we've got now, because that's one area I do think is massively misunderstood, is the scheduling of tournaments. Another one that kills me, dude, is where someone literally will run, like, I'm talking like a massive event like I Am Clone right now. They'll run an enormous event, and it's almost like whoever the guy scheduling the matches and deciding what was on the A stream was just like one of those cunts, like, the pro players who are like, but he's my mate, why would I kick him? And you're like, because he's bad at the game. Like, no, but he's a friend and he will get... I should have done it in a French accent just to make it funny there, obviously. Everyone knows the players I'm talking about. Well, in this scenario, right, dude, I've seen people pick games, no joke, where they put, like, the best team in the world on the B stream, and they're like, but, we want to, like, promote, like, smaller teams, so we're going to put these two underdogs on the A stream. It's like, are you aware this is an entertainment industry where we're all losing money? That makes no sense. That is totally inappropriate. I mean, you might know this yourself from working as talent. A few years back, they even used to run like that. And they would literally, behind closed doors, say to, like, some casters, Anderson said, like, we're actually going to give the final to these, like, smaller casters because they've never done one before, and you're going to get the semi-final. And I used to be sat there like, do you just want less viewers for the final or something? Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, the first thing you do is put, like, the most famous, the most popular casters on the biggest game. That's like check mark one of doing the tournament schedule. But actually, TOs seem to be way off. They're not really in tune with what we're talking about on this one, I don't feel like. I don't think a lot of them kind of understand what we're discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the whole, like, people being friends with one another, etc. thing plays a part. I mean, there's also cases where, like, I am sure you're aware of, like, some teams, particularly in tournament formats, where for, let's just say you might start playing on a different day because of the format. Like, for example, DreamHack Opens, I think, are a good example. You typically play Group A on day one, Group B on day two, and then the elimination games, and then get to playoffs. Like, a lot of the times those groups, the way those groups get decided in part is, like, if somebody says that I have, like, a travel reason, I can't get there that day, the big name team says, like, we won't come there on Thursday, but if you put us on the Friday group, we'll come in. And, like, sometimes there's a couple of teams that say that, and, like, that's why the group is just, like, wrong and the matchups are poor, etc. And, like, we can talk about whether that's, like, the only way to get the big team, in which case, like, that might be the right way. But, like, that's the kind of stuff that happens. And I think there's a bunch of times, like you said, where it should not happen and there's not actual cost. So, for example, if a tournament is already ongoing, everybody's at the tournament, it's not like some team is going to forfeit themselves out because their schedule isn't the one they want once they're already there, for example. So I agree with you. I think there would be a bunch of ways that you could further optimize it. And I guess, like, going back to the length a little bit, like, I would just like to see more use of best of ones, for example. I don't know if how much people have spent time looking at it, but the Blast tournaments that had those infamous best of one formats that everybody quote unquote hated had great viewership. Just great viewership compared to comparable compared to comparable tournaments. And I think it's because
do you know any numbers off your head? Obviously I don't mean like specific, but like for example, when you say like comparable, was some of the Blast Pro series you ever getting like, you know, what like a DreamHack Masters would or something, like, you know, in theory a much better format? Was it up there?
So I pulled up one of the files that I have when I was looking away from the camera when we were talking a little before. So Blast Pro Series Copenhagen, for example, had the same average viewership as IEM Oakland, had the same average viewership as, remember, the Epic Epicenter event where SK played VP in the finals.
Okay.
Basically the same viewership as that year's CSL New York. I think that was the Liquid Mouse Sports final. Yep. Just barely below DreamHack Masters Malmo. So like many of those tournaments, they just did really well viewership wise, and I think the same goes. Blast Pro Istanbul 2018 was, I think, like the 5th highest average viewership for the year. For 2018 in average viewership terms, I think Lisbon was basically the same as Katowice.
And you think the best ones contribute to this? Well,
I mean, look, I don't have the answer. I suspect that one of the reasons is like, one, you have very good teams, so people want to watch. Two, it's that you have a very predictable schedule. You know exactly when games are going to start. You know how long they're going to take. Like, it's very easy for me to say that, like, okay, so at 2 p.m., MIBR plays Astralis. I'm watching that game, for example. It's not they play the second game or the third game of the day, so it could be somewhere between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. start time. I suspect that at least part of that was driven by the fact that it was best of ones, so it's very manageable game length. It's easy to just go watch a game, and I think also it's predictable, like when games will start. I mean, look, I'll tell you, I put off watching. I remember in like 2008, I think between like tournaments back when I was a player, we'd usually take like a week off after tournaments. Like big tournaments, like major equivalents, to kind of just like relax and then come back fresh after. And during those weeks, I started watching the IMDb top 250 movies, basically in order, just to like, just watch all the movies that I'd like missed out on. And even I noticed that like if a movie is 3 hours, even if it's like an all-time classic, I'm just less likely to watch it sometimes than a 1.5 hour. And I think I just think that's generally speaking true. It's easier to commit yourself to something shorter. It's the same as like, I'm more likely to binge watch a show that has 20-minute episodes than 40-minute episodes, even if the 40-minute show is better. And that's because I don't want to watch something in half, and 20 minutes you can commit to very easily all the time. You can delay things by 20 minutes. You can go out 20 minutes later, you can have dinner 20 minutes later. But an hour, like 40 minutes is like close to an hour. That's harder. So I suspect that has an impact. Like, can't quantify it, but I think those events specifically, I think, have some compelling viewership data that I think has been overlooked by many people, in part because, one, there were, I think, U.S. government-related restrictions to getting stuff to Istanbul at the time. Like trade restrictions at the time of the event. So that event was like a massive loss financially. And that was the first year of Blast, really, because they only did the Copenhagen event in 2017. So, they were still like kind of ramping up even their commercial team, much less like getting close to monetizing it efficiently. So I think people kind of overlooked that. I think and I think the other piece is like, the feedback online. I think most people said that they disliked the event, disliked best of ones, didn't like that. I think in reality, I think there's a lot of people who like the fact that every map that they're watching actually matters. They don't have to wait for the third map. It's OT now in FaZe Gambit on my screen. Base is up 1-0. The pressure is not identical between the two. Like, would this be more exciting if it were the final map? Well, I mean, I've done some research to it, and I'm not saying it's like it's like perfect 1-for-1, but like, a lot of the time, wouldn't you know, either the better team wins their own map and the worst team wins their own map, and you go to the third map, which would have been the map anyway, if they vetoed down to best of one, or the better team wins the other map as well, and it's 2-0. So like, I honestly, just based on like the data that I've skimmed through, and it's a bunch of manual labor, and obviously like it's not perfect because you also you prefer for the game differently if it's best of one, like all these different things are taken into account, some of which I think favor the better team because they would take less risks, etc. But I think best of ones, generally speaking, more exciting, better product than people give it credit for. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that just has a very bad rep, and I think I don't think it's very likely that we're getting a lot more of them. But that's something that I would like to see use more.
I mean, first of all, I think you're definitely right. Like, unfortunately, people aren't going to go back to best of one just conceptually. Like, people have just, like, that ship's sort of sailed. People have decided best of three's the best format, The problem is, and obviously it goes without saying, players are always going to say, because they're always going to feel like they're going to win the best of three instead of the best of one.
They want the safety net. They want the safety net, less variance.
I even think as well, by the way, they've sort of done themselves a disservice as well, because I also do actually think one of the reasons, especially in the online era, that so many games go to 3 maps is exactly because when you're 1-0 up, dude, Na'Vi's the worst example of this ever. If Na'Vi really know that it's a 14-14 game and it's the decider, Na'Vi will play like they're trying to win the fucking game. If they're 1 map up and the second map's 14-14, everyone in the world knows they lose that second map and will go 3 maps. Like, that's just who that fucking team is. When there's no pressure, they don't play their best. Like, they're just one of those teams. So I even think that's even a factor. Like, players also, in a way, want to be able to be lazy in the series and go, well, listen, there's plenty of time for us to win the second map. Or, that's like fucking co-op, isn't it? But the other problem is, this is also a unique format problem to specifically esports, because obviously if you have a best of 3 series, part of the problem, we said it in hours, but part of the problem is it could be a fast 2-0, it could be a really long 3-map series, and the difference is the 4.5 to 1.5 hours, right? Well, one of the problems is that doesn't exist in sports. Like, even in the NHL where you play a best of 7, the matches are on different days. So I can still schedule appropriately, and I've got plenty of time to, rejig my schedule if it's a quick 4-0. Like, it's not the end of the world. Unfortunately, in esports, because we're playing it all on the same day, it does mean that best of 3 is always going to be a very flawed format for the entertainment, like the broadcast side of it, unfortunately. It's never going to be the most satisfying for, like, the average fan.
That's why we really need to get the CO format back. But,
that was also what we actually...
would actually solve a lot of the problems.
Here's the problem, mate. That was actually what I literally brought up on the end of the last By the Numbers episode, which the VOD isn't out for. I basically said the reason why, the best selling point of that is it's like an American football game. I can tell you roughly exactly how long it lasts. Like, it's 20 minutes for both. By the way, you can make it less, you can make it 10 minutes, but let's say it's 20 minutes.
You can also make it more if you'd like, you can also make it more if you wanted to.
Yes.
Then it's like sort of
but
like...
we can schedule that a lot more easily.
Yeah.
It goes out. The problem is this, as has been a theme of this episode, you've got another massive conceptual mountain to climb there where I've got to convince pro players to fucking play. So only T rounds count, and the stupid ass fans going to be, what's going to buy the CT's not going in. Like, the problem with that is it's just like the pay-per-view thing. It's obviously a good solution, but the initial adoption period is the hardest part. I feel like that's the mountain to overcome.
Yeah.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.